The day began like any other, with the hiss of steam rising from the laundry press and the faint smell of detergent clinging to the air. Lila stood beside her mother, folding a crisp white dress shirt that belonged to one of the wealthiest men in the city, Mr. Alistair Crane. His estate was the kind of place most people only saw in magazines. Grand hallways with oil paintings staring down from gilded frames, velvet drapes that pooled like rivers of red on polished marble floors, and an air so still it made you lower your voice without knowing why. Lila's mother had worked here for almost 2 decades, trusted enough to manage the laundry room without anyone watching over her shoulder. But for Lila, visiting the mansion was always an exercise in restraint. She was told to stay close, keep quiet, and never wander. Still, there was something about the place, something unspoken, that tugged at her curiosity. This time it was a stain. As she smoothed the shirt over the ironing board, her eyes caught a faint blotch near the hem. It wasn't wine or coffee, and it didn't look fresh. The edges were faded, and the mark itself had a peculiar bluish-black hue. When she leaned closer, she realized it wasn't just a stain, it was lines. Thin, deliberate lines, curling into the suggestion of a coastline. Her pulse quickened. She turned the fabric under the light, and more markings appeared, faint, as if someone had tried to scrub them away decades ago. But the design was too precise to be accidental. She recognized small X-shaped symbols scattered along the curved lines, much like the ones she'd seen in her history class when they studied old exploration maps. Lila hesitated. She knew she shouldn't pry. Her mother would scold her for even thinking about it. But her fingers moved anyway, tracing the delicate ink. The fabric felt worn here, softer than the rest, as though it had been handled too much. "Lila, fold that and put it aside," her mother said, without looking up from the sheets she was pressing. "That shirt belongs to Mr. Crane himself. Be careful." "Where did it come from?" Lila asked casually, though her voice felt tight. Her mother's hands paused, just for a second, before she answered. "His private wardrobe. Don't ask more than that. And don't tell him you noticed anything." That pause spoke volumes. Lila had learned long ago that her mother's silences meant more than her words. She didn't push, at least not out loud, but her mind was already racing. Why would a reclusive millionaire have an old shirt with an almost invisible map etched into the fabric? And why did her mother's voice drop ever so slightly when she mentioned his name? Lila folded the shirt neatly, but instead of putting it with the others, she set it aside in a separate basket. Her eyes darted to the far corner of the laundry room, where a narrow door led to a hallway lined with cabinets and closets. She'd only been down there once before, years ago, when she was small enough to slip through unnoticed. Back then, she'd thought it was just a storage area. Now she wondered if it might hold more than dust and linens. A sound above them, the muffled thump of footsteps, made her freeze. Mr. Crane's study was directly overhead. Rumor among the staff was that the man spent hours there each day, poring over old books, locked away from the world. Some said he collected rare manuscripts. Others claimed he kept valuables in hidden safes. Whatever the truth, no one was allowed inside. The idea settled in her chest like a dare. Her fingers brushed the shirt one more time. The faint ink seemed to whisper a challenge, as if it wanted her to follow its lines to wherever they led. Lila didn't know it yet, but the decision she made in that quiet laundry room would ripple far beyond the mansion's walls. She was standing at the edge of something vast and dangerous. A story that began with a stain, but would end with history itself being rewritten. If you're enjoying this story of justice and hidden strength, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple act of prejudice turned into the most valuable lesson of Alistair Crane's life. The moment passed, but the question lingered. And deep inside, Lila had already decided she wasn't going to let this mystery go. The laundry room was warm and bright, but in Lila's mind, shadows had started creeping in. The shirt with the strange markings sat folded neatly on the counter, looking harmless, ordinary. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that she had stumbled onto something that didn't belong in this quiet corner of domestic routine. Her mother worked in silence, the rhythmic hiss of the steam press punctuating each fold and stack. For a while, Lila stayed quiet too, but her thoughts kept circling back to the faint ink lines. Finally, she broke the silence. "You've worked here a long time," she began carefully. "You must know where all the clothes come from, right?" Her mother glanced at her without stopping her work. "Enough to know which ones you shouldn't touch." Lila's gaze dropped to the shirt. "What about this one? It's old, isn't it?" Her mother hesitated, just enough to confirm Lila's suspicion. "That belonged to Mr. Crane years ago," she said at last. "He doesn't wear it anymore, but he keeps it. Some clothes. They're not just clothes." "What do you mean?" Her mother pressed the hem of a sheet with deliberate care, as if buying time before answering. "He's a collector. Old books, rare things. He travels a lot, or used to. I heard him once, talking on the phone about maps and expeditions. But that's his business, not ours." She met Lila's eyes with quiet warning. Best to stay out of it. Lila nodded, but inside, her curiosity only sharpened. She had seen the way her mother's lips tightened when she mentioned Mr. Crane's travels, as though there was more to the story, and she remembered overhearing other staff whisper about rooms no one cleaned, about packages arriving from distant countries marked with foreign stamps. Later that afternoon, while delivering folded laundry upstairs, Lila's mother led her past a narrow hallway she had never noticed before. A heavy wooden door stood at the end, its brass handle polished to a dull gleam. "That's his study," her mother murmured, almost to herself, before steering Lila toward the main staircase. The glimpse was brief, but it was enough. Through the slightly ajar door, Lila saw shelves upon shelves of books, the spines faded with age. A large desk sat in the middle, covered in papers, magnifying glasses, and rolled parchments. The air seemed thicker there, as if steeped in secrets. That night, lying in bed, Lila replayed the day's moments over and over, the strange ink lines, her mother's reluctance, the glimpse of the study. If the shirt was connected to one of Mr. Crane's expeditions, what kind of map was it? And why had it been hidden in something as ordinary as clothing? Her mind drifted back to history class 2 years ago, when her teacher had shown the class an image of the Vinland map. It was controversial, said to prove Viking explorers reached North America centuries before Columbus. Lila remembered the fine black lines, the crude coastlines, the small runic symbols that dotted the edges. The markings on the shirt. They weren't identical, but they had that same air of deliberate ancient craft. The next morning, as she helped her mother carry linens to the guest rooms, Lila caught sight of Mr. Crane himself for the first time in months. He was in the foyer, speaking quietly to a tall man in a dark coat. Both men leaned over a large flat case as though guarding its contents from curious eyes. When they noticed her, the conversation stopped abruptly, and Mr. Crane's gaze followed her until she disappeared into the next hallway. She felt the weight of that look long after it was gone. It confirmed something for her. Whatever was in that shirt, and perhaps in that study, wasn't just a curiosity. It was something valuable, maybe even dangerous. And Mr. Crane wasn't the type to share. But Lila had never been good at leaving mysteries unsolved. Rain pattered against the mansion's tall windows the following afternoon, casting silver streaks over the marble floors. The weather had driven the household into an unusual hush, no guests arriving, no staff bustling from room to room. Lila's mother worked steadily in the laundry, her focus bent on a delicate silk gown, leaving Lila to sort a pile of towels. That's when she heard it, the faint click of a door closing somewhere down the corridor. She glanced toward the narrow hallway she'd seen before, the one that ended with the heavy wooden door to Mr. Crane's study. Her mother's back was turned. It would have been so easy to stay where she was, to ignore the pull of curiosity. But Lila felt the same itch she'd had since first touching the map-stained shirt. The thought that there might be more to find, that the fragment on the shirt was only part of a whole, gnawed at her, until she quietly slipped away. Her sneakers made almost no sound on the polished floor as she walked down the hallway. The air cooled the closer she got, and the faint scent of old paper and leather drifted from beneath the study door. She paused, listening. Silence. The brass handle turned easily under her hand. Inside, the study was dim, lit only by the soft grey light from a tall window. Shelves rose high on either side, crammed with books and artifacts, globes mottled with age, brass compasses, carved wooden boxes. The desk at the centre was as she'd glimpsed it before, crowded with maps, parchment rolls and magnifying lenses. But it wasn't the desk that caught her attention. Against the far wall stood a small cabinet with 3 drawers. The top 2 were ajar, stuffed with papers, but the bottom drawer was shut tight. Its surface scratched near the lock as though it had been forced before. Her heartbeat quickened. Dropping to her knees, she tugged at the handle. Locked. She scanned the room for anything that might help. Her eyes landed on a thin metal letter opener lying on the desk. It took 3 careful tries, but the lock clicked open with a soft snap. Inside was a cloth-wrapped bundle. She drew it out and placed it on the carpet, unrolling it slowly. A wave of dust rose into the air, carrying with it the faint, musty scent of something long forgotten. Within the folds lay several items. A brittle photograph of a rocky coastline, its edges burned, a leather-bound notebook with cramped handwriting in a language she didn't recognize, and, most startling of all, 2 pieces of fabric, thicker and darker than the shirt she'd found, each marked with the same faint ink lines. She spread them side by side. Her breath caught. The coastline from the shirt fragment continued across these pieces, forming a jagged sweep that matched no modern map she knew. Tiny symbols like runes dotted the interior. One corner bore a sketch of a ship with a high prow, its dragon head curling above the waves. Vikings. She was still staring when a shadow darkened the doorway. "What?" a deep voice asked. "Do you think you're doing?" Lila whipped around to see Mr. Crane standing there, his expression unreadable, his gaze locked on the fabric in her hands. For a moment, neither of them moved. "I was just—" she began, but the words died under the weight of his stare. "Those," he said slowly, stepping into the room, "are not toys. Put them back. Now." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a steel edge that sent a chill down her spine. Yet beneath the anger, she caught something else in his eyes, something closer to fear. And that, more than anything, told her she had found something worth risking trouble for. Lila's hands trembled as she slid the cloth pieces back into the drawer, the weight of Mr. Crane's stare pressing down on her. He didn't shout, didn't make a scene. He simply stepped forward, shut the drawer with deliberate slowness, and turned the key in the lock. The soft click was final, like a cell door closing. "You shouldn't be in here," he said, his tone low but cutting. "This is a private space. If your mother values her position here, I suggest you remember that." The words were measured, but the warning beneath them was unmistakable. Lila lowered her gaze and murmured an apology, though her mind was still spinning. She'd seen the symbols clearly enough to know she wasn't imagining things. The coastline, the runes, the ship. It was all too deliberate to be some decorative scrap. Mr. Crane moved toward his desk, shuffling papers as if dismissing her entirely. But when he spoke again, his voice had an odd tightness. "Some things are buried for a reason. Digging them up doesn't always bring treasure. Sometimes it brings trouble." It was the kind of line a movie villain might say before the hero ignored them, and that was exactly what Lila intended to do. That evening, back in her small apartment, she sat at the kitchen table with a notebook. Her mother was still at work finishing a late shift, so Lila had the place to herself. She began sketching from memory, the curves of the coastline, the jagged points where the land jutted into the sea, the scattered X marks. She even tried to recreate the runic symbols, though she wasn't sure of their accuracy. When she finished, she stared at the drawing. The coastline reminded her of somewhere cold, remote, jagged cliffs meeting an icy ocean. She thought about the photograph she'd found in the drawer, the burnt edges, the stark, lonely shore. Could it be the same place? The next day at school, she brought the sketch to her history teacher, Mr. Whitaker, under the guise of a project idea. His eyes lit up the moment he saw it. "These symbols," he murmured, tracing the runes with a fingertip. "They're Norse, Viking age, and this coastline. This could be part of the Labrador coast, or even Baffin Island. But where did you—" He stopped abruptly, perhaps sensing he was prying. "I just found it," Lila said quickly. "Do you think it could be a real map?" Mr. Whitaker leaned back, considering. "If it is, it's an unusual one. Most known Viking maps were drawn on parchment or carved into wood. Fabric. That's rare. Very rare." His voice carried that same spark of excitement Lila felt in her chest, but it was also tinged with caution. "If you have more of this," he added, "you need to be careful. People have fought over less." That night, she dreamed of longships slicing through icy waters, of torches flickering in coastal caves. She woke with her mind set. If there were more pieces of that map, she was going to find them. 2 days later, the opportunity came. Her mother was sent upstairs to clean the guest rooms, leaving Lila alone in the laundry with a heap of clothes from Mr. Crane's private quarters. She moved through them with deliberate care, scanning each shirt, each cuff, each seam. It was in the pocket of an old wool vest that she found it, a tiny scrap of the same coarse fabric as before, folded into a square no bigger than her palm. On it, the faint outline of what looked like an island with a single rune in the center. Her heart pounded as she slipped it into her backpack. This wasn't just confirmation of the map's existence, it was proof the pieces were still scattered, hidden in plain sight. But she wasn't the only one searching. That evening, as she left the mansion, she caught sight of the tall man in the dark coat, the one she'd seen with Mr. Crane. He was standing by the gate, speaking into his phone, but his eyes flicked toward her as she passed, and in that instant, she knew. He recognized her, and he knew she had found something. The night air felt heavier than usual as Lila walked home, her backpack pressed tight against her side. Every few steps, she glanced over her shoulder. The tall man in the dark coat was no longer by the gate, but that didn't stop the crawling sensation between her shoulder blades. When she reached her building, she went straight to her room and shut the door. Only then did she take out the scrap of coarse fabric from the vest pocket. Under the warm yellow light of her desk lamp, the faint ink seemed sharper than it had in the laundry room. The single rune in the center stood like a sentinel, simple, angular, and deliberate. She pulled out her phone and searched for Viking runic alphabets, scrolling through images until she found a match. Ingwaz, the rune of potential, of something hidden beneath the earth waiting to be brought forth. A shiver passed through her. The next day, her mother noticed the distracted way Lila moved through her chores. "What's on your mind?" she asked, folding towels into neat stacks. Lila hesitated. She wanted to tell her mother everything, but the warning in Mr. Crane's voice still echoed in her head. Instead, she settled for half-truths. "Just school stuff. History project." Her mother didn't press, but her eyes lingered a moment longer than usual, as if she could see straight through the lie. That afternoon, while delivering a fresh set of linens to the upper floors, Lila passed the study door again. This time, it was ajar. She caught a glimpse of Mr. Crane speaking to the tall man in low, urgent tones. On the desk between them lay the same cloth bundle she had unwrapped days before. The pieces were spread out, and both men were bent over them, comparing the markings to a larger map pinned on the wall. Lila ducked back before they saw her, her pulse hammering. The realization hit hard. They weren't just keeping these pieces locked away, they were actively trying to complete the map. And if they were still searching, they didn't have all the pieces yet. Later that evening, she met Mr. Whitaker at the small cafe near the school. She hadn't told him everything, just enough to pique his interest. When she pulled the fabric scrap from her bag and slid it across the table, his eyes widened. "Lila," he whispered, this could be priceless. If the map's complete, it might point to a Viking settlement no one's ever documented." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "But you need to understand, if people find out you have this, they will want it, badly, and they won't all play fair." She thought of the tall man's cold stare and felt the truth of his words settle in her bones. Over the next few days, the atmosphere at the mansion shifted. Mr. Crane moved through the halls with a restless energy, and the tall man appeared more often, always watching. Lila stuck close to her mother, careful not to draw attention, but her mind was already working on the next step. If the map pointed to a real location, she needed to see it before they did. And to do that, she had to put the pieces together, literally. The break came unexpectedly. While gathering laundry from the guest wing, she found another scrap tucked into the lining of a travel bag, hidden so deeply she almost missed it. This one showed the tip of a peninsula, with waves drawn along the coastline and a cluster of runes marking a narrow inlet. By the time she finished her shift, her backpack held 3 pieces of the puzzle. She spread them out on her bed that night, fitting the edges together like a secret game. Slowly, a fragment of the whole began to emerge. But she wasn't the only one closing in. Just after midnight, a sound outside her window jolted her upright. A soft, deliberate scrape, like a shoe against brick. She froze, listening. A shadow moved past the glass, too tall to be her neighbour's, too slow to be casual. And then came the knock. 3 sharp raps, not on her door, on her mind. Whoever was out there knew exactly what she had, and they had come for it. The knock didn't come again. That somehow made it worse. Lila sat frozen on her bed, the 3 scraps of map still spread out before her like a crime scene. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure whoever was outside could hear it. She rose slowly, crossing the small room on bare feet, and eased the curtain aside. The street lamp below cast a narrow cone of yellow light on the wet pavement, but the space directly beneath her window was in shadow. Still, she caught the faint glint of eyes reflecting light. Watching. A sudden flash of movement broke her paralysis. She grabbed her phone, her fingers hovering over the call button for her mother. But then she stopped. If her mother came home now, she'd be walking straight into danger. Instead, Lila slid the fabric pieces into a worn shoebox, shoved it under her bed, and slipped out through the kitchen door into the narrow back alley. She cut through the row of garages, heart hammering, until she reached the dimly lit corner near the bus stop. Only when she was sure no one was following did she dial the one person who might help. Mr. Whittaker answered on the second ring. "Lila, it's late. What's wrong?" "I think someone's watching me," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "It's about the map. I found more pieces." There was a pause on the line. "Meet me at the library tomorrow after class. Bring everything." The next day, she kept her head down in school, feeling the weight of eyes on her even in crowded hallways. When she finally slipped into the quiet sanctuary of the library, Mr. Whittaker was waiting at a corner table with a stack of reference books. "Show me," he said. Lila laid the pieces out carefully. He studied them, his brow furrowing, then began flipping through an old atlas. "These match a portion of the northern Labrador coast near the Torngat Mountains. See here? The fjords, the headlands, they're almost identical. And these runes..." He pointed to one cluster. "This marks a safe harbor. This," he tapped the Ingwaz rune, "could indicate something buried." Lila felt a thrill of both fear and excitement. So, treasure? Possibly. But more importantly, if this is authentic, it proves Norse explorers traveled farther and left more behind than we thought. Before she could reply, he leaned closer, lowering his voice. "If Crane and his associate are looking for this, they'll stop at nothing. We have to get there first." The plan formed quickly. Mr. Whittaker had contacts at the local university, people who could quietly arrange transport to the remote coast. They'd leave on Friday, under the guise of a research trip. That night, Lila returned home to find her mother unusually quiet at the dinner table. "Mr. Crane asked about you today," her mother said finally. "He wanted to know if you'd been in his study." Lila kept her expression neutral. "What did you say?" "That I trust you." Her mother's gaze was steady but troubled. "But be careful, Lila. Men like him, they don't forgive easily." 2 days later, Lila and Mr. Whittaker stood at the edge of a rugged coastal inlet, the air sharp with salt and cold. Behind them, the small charter boat bobbed in the water, its engine ticking softly as it cooled. The fjord stretched ahead, narrow and winding, its cliffs rising like black walls. Somewhere in that labyrinth of stone and ice, the rest of the map would come to life. As they hiked inland, Lila couldn't shake the feeling they weren't alone. Footprints in the snow behind them seemed fresher than they should have been. A gull's cry echoed once, twice, then was replaced by the faint crunch of boots. She glanced at Mr. Whittaker, who gave a subtle nod. They both knew. Crane's men had found them, and the real race was about to begin. The snow crunched softly under their boots, every step magnified by the silence of the fjord. The air was so still that Lila could hear her own heartbeat, quick and uneven. She and Mr. Whittaker pressed forward, weaving between jagged rocks that jutted out of the frozen earth like the bones of some ancient beast. The inlet curved sharply, revealing a narrow strip of beach littered with driftwood. Beyond it, a dark opening yawned in the cliff face, a cave, its entrance half hidden by ice. Lila's pulse leapt. "This is it," Mr. Whittaker murmured. "The runes marked a narrow inlet, and this matches the sketch perfectly." But before they could reach it, a low voice carried over the wind. "Going somewhere?" They turned to see the tall man in the dark coat stepping from behind a boulder, two others flanking him. His eyes were locked on Lila's backpack. "I believe you have something that belongs to Mr. Crane." Her fingers tightened on the straps. "It doesn't belong to him. It's history. It belongs to everyone." He smirked. "That's not how the world works, girl." Mr. Whittaker stepped in front of her. "We're not giving it to you." The tall man's smirk vanished. He signaled to one of his men, who began circling toward the cave. Lila's mind raced. If they got inside first, they could strip it of everything before she and Mr. Whittaker had a chance. Without thinking, she darted toward the opening. The ice beneath her boots cracked in protest, but she didn't slow. She slipped through the mouth of the cave, just as the first of Crane's men lunged for her, his fingers grazing the strap of her pack. Inside, the air was damp and cold, carrying the smell of salt and something metallic. Her headlamp beam cut through the darkness, revealing walls etched with faint carvings. Shields, ships, figures in horned helmets. The deeper she went, the more the carvings gave way to shapes glinting under the light. Gold. Not piles of it, but scattered. Coins stamped with runes, ornate brooches, the hilt of a sword protruding from a half-buried chest. The sight stole her breath. Mr. Whittaker caught up, his voice hushed with awe. "This is... Lila, this is the discovery of a lifetime." The sound of footsteps behind them snapped them back to reality. Crane's men were in the cave. "Take pictures," Lila whispered, fumbling for her phone. "We need proof before they—" The tall man's voice cut her off. "You should have listened to Mr. Crane." In the tense seconds that followed, Lila's eyes fell on something wedged high in a crack in the wall, a final scrap of the coarse fabric. She scrambled up the icy rock, her gloves scraping against stone, and yanked it free. When she unfolded it, the complete coastline stretched before her in faded ink. A single rune sat at its center, Ingwars. The tall man stepped closer, reaching for it, but the ground shuddered. Somewhere deep in the cave, ice cracked and shifted. A spray of snow and grit fell from above. Mr. Whittaker's voice was sharp. "We have to go, now!" Lila clutched the completed map and backed toward the entrance. The tall man hesitated, torn between pursuit and self-preservation. Another loud crack decided for him. He cursed and bolted. They burst out into the frozen daylight just as a chunk of the cliffside gave way, sealing part of the cave behind a cascade of rock and ice. Lila stood doubled over, gasping, the complete map still in her grip. She met Mr. Whittaker's eyes, both of them knowing the truth. They had beaten Crane to it. But the hardest part, bringing the discovery into the light, was still ahead. 2 months later, the snow along the Labrador coast had melted into thin, dirty patches, revealing dark earth beneath. In a small lecture hall at the university, Lila sat beside Mr. Whittaker, the completed Viking map resting under a protective glass case at the front of the room. Sunlight streamed through high windows, glinting off the display. Word of the discovery had spread faster than either of them imagined. Archaeologists from across the country had descended on the fjord, carefully excavating the cave before spring thaw made it too dangerous to enter. The artifacts were now catalogued, preserved, and stored under museum care. More importantly, every piece had been documented in the public record, free from private hoarding or sale. Lila had expected Mr. Crane to make trouble. For weeks after they returned, she kept expecting to see the tall man in the dark coat appear in some shadowed corner, but no one came. Either the collapse had discouraged them, or the publicity surrounding the find made any attempt to claim it too risky. Now, as the audience filed into the lecture hall, she felt the weight of what they'd done settling over her. She'd helped uncover proof that Vikings had sailed farther than the history books admitted. Proof that would change the way people thought about the past. When Mr. Whittaker introduced her, she felt a flush rise in her cheeks. Lila was instrumental in this discovery, he said to the crowd. Her persistence, and yes, her courage, made this possible. Sometimes history is written not by the wealthy or the powerful, but by those who refuse to look away when they find a mystery. After the lecture, a curator approached her. "We'd like to credit you officially in the exhibit," she said warmly. "Not just for finding the map, but for ensuring it stayed in the hands of the public." That night, back in their small apartment, her mother placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You scared me half to death," she admitted. "But I'm proud of you. You didn't just find treasure, Lila. You found your voice." Lila smiled, thinking of the Ingwaz rune, the symbol of potential waiting beneath the earth. It had been more than a mark on a map. It had been a reflection of her own journey, something hidden, untested, that only revealed itself when she dared to dig deeper. And the lesson? Treasure isn't always gold or ancient artifacts. Sometimes it's the knowledge that you can stand your ground even when the odds and the powerful are against you. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel to discover more stories about how extraordinary people turn humiliation into triumph.